Chapter 9, A Turn for the Worse. Daddy put on an Academy Award performance when he returned, and I showed him the engagement ring. Of course, I was tempted to shatter the illusion of the surprise of my engagement and tell him that I knew that he already knew Samuel's intention, that I knew they had been apart planning together. But Mother dying in the room upstairs, we so needed good news. I decided I would join him in the world of make-believe. We were a family out to sea, gasping desperately for the life raft of hope. As for revelations Mother had told me, I was determined that for now and perhaps forever I would keep them well hidden inside me. Daddy would never look at my face and see what I knew. "I'm very happy for you, dear," he said. "I'm very happy for all of us. It's a perfect union. You'll be happy together and we'll build something profitable. The bottom line is marriage can be a sensible partnership too." "I know, Daddy. I've already told Mother and now she's excited." She looks so tired and so much weaker though. It's the cure that's killing her now. "Yes," he said sadly, despair returning to wash the happiness out of his eyes. He shook his head. "I don't know if I should go to this party. I'm not much in the mood for people and music and laughter." "Go for a little while," I told him. "Show your face and then leave," I said. He nodded. "You're right. You always have sensible suggestion, Olivia." He kissed me on the forehead quickly, and I couldn't help but think of the way he kissed me was somehow reserved, cold. Something inside him, despite his promises to Mommy, despite his own desire, kept him from being fully my father. He congratulated me again on my engagement before looking in on Mother. I had, on my very own this time, gone and bought myself a new outfit for the child's engagement party. It was a two-piece navy blue wool suit with a silk blouse. I put on a thin pearl rope necklace and matching earrings, and then indulged myself with more makeup than ever, choosing one of Belinda's brighter reds for my lipstick. I stood before the mirror and tested the length of my jacket sleeve as I moved my arm about, just to be sure my ring was always highlighted. Satisfied, I went to show Mother how I looked, but she fell asleep. Her nurse looked up from the book she was reading, looked at Mother, then turned to me to shake her head softly, her eyes dark with concern. I nodded and backed out of the room. "I'll stop when I return," I thought. Samuel was so excited and happy he nearly bounced in his seat as we talked, filling me about how his father was happy with our engagement. "Did it make your mother happy?" he asked as we drove to the child's house. "Yes, but she's not doing well, Samuel. I'm very concerned about her condition," I said. "Each day she grows weaker and smaller. It's as if she's fading away in that bed." "I'm so sorry," he said, and was silent. Dark thoughts like the tide crawled up to soak our brains in the dreary images. However, our heavy moment didn't last long. The sight of the child's estate, with the line of expensive cars building up to the driveway, people in elegant dress, milling about in the music from the small orchestra wafting through the air, brought us out of our morose mood. Everyone who was anyone in Cape Cod society was present, as well as social editors and their photographers. Since it was a partly cloudy, warm day with a gentle breeze coming from the southwest, it couldn't have been a more perfect afternoon affair. The guests were everywhere, on the porch, around the tables set up in front of the orchestra, just wandering about the lawns and the gardens. Through the line of red maples behind the house, patches of deep blue ocean were visible. Overflowing with thousand anxieties, I got out of Samuel's car when the valet opened my door. Naturally, every new arrival drew interest to the guests already gathered. I saw people lean toward each other to whisper. "Let's get some champagne," Samuel suggested and took my arm. With our glasses in hand, we approached Nelson's parents and wished them the best. Nelson's mother noticed my ring immediately and asked about it. "We thought we might as well join the happy married couples in this world," Samuel declared. The news spread so fast through the gathering, it was as if a breeze had its own lips and whispered in every ear. When Daddy arrived, he was quickly surrounded by his friends and associates and congratulated as well. Nelson's fiancée hugged me and wished me luck too. She raved about my ring. Hers was a little larger, but I thought mine was more elegant because of the baguettes. I was grateful to the jeweler who had given Samuel the advice and eventually told him so. Except for a quick greeting and a smile and a nod of congratulations from him, Nelson didn't spend much time talking to us. In fairness, he was in demand at every turn. It was difficult for him to take too much time on any one couple. Just before we all sat at the tables to begin a sumptuous feast, Daddy came to tell me he was making his subtle exit. He was too nervous about Mother to stay much longer, he said. "She doesn't even know I left the house. She wasn't awake." "She's been sleeping a lot now, Daddy." "I know." His face was somber for a moment, then he smiled. "Everyone's raving about you, Olivia. I think you and Samuel stole some of the child's spotlight here." "I doubt that, Daddy," I said. "This is quite an engagement party." It was such an elaborate affair, with caviar, hors d'oeuvres, shrimp and lobster entrees, as well as prime cuts of beef and roast turkey, and bowls filled with at least dozens of varieties of salads, a half a dozen prepared dishes of potatoes, Portuguese breads, rolls, and Viennese dessert cart that actually drew an applause. Nothing was spared to make this one of the most memorable occasions in the social season. Those who took time to speak to me and Samuel, asked after Mother, but really didn't want to talk about her at all. It was as if any possible suggestion of unpleasantness was forbidden this afternoon. "Just don't ask," I wanted to say and leave it at that. Samuel knew many of the business people at the party and found himself embroiled in conversation most of the afternoon. I watched Nelson and his fiancée and occasionally caught him gazing at me and throwing me a smile or lifting his glass to toast me too. Dancing started and I was suddenly taken by surprise when Nelson asked me to dance immediately after he danced with his fiancée. "It's only proper that I dance with all the engaged women here tonight," he said. Samuel laughed. "Do I have your permission, Samuel?" "Oh, absolutely," he said, "but you'd better ask Olivia. She's the one who has to agree," he wisely added. "Miss Gordon?" I rose from my seat and he went onto the dance floor. I felt every female eye on me as he took my hand and put it over my waist. "You look beautiful. I'm really happy for you, Olivia," he said. "I hope you'll be as happy as I will." "I don't know how happy you'll be, Nelson, so I won't agree to that just yet," I said. He laughed nervously. "I can see that you and I will always have to be direct and truthful with each other," he realized. "All right," I said, my eyes fixed on his. "Let's make that promise." "Okay, let's play truth or dare, Olivia," he challenged. "Let's." He brought his cheek closer to mine and whispered, "Are you in love, Olivia?" "Are you?" "I think so," he said. "I expect to be," I said. He pulled back slowly, and I looked into his eyes. They were laughing and full of sparkling light. Butterflies panicked in my chest. I was afraid he would see how much I cared for him. I felt as if I would soon be standing naked in front of him, unable to hide the thought, the feeling, or my dream. "You and I are more alike than I would have ever thought," he said, his eyes turning dark and serious for a moment. "I hope we'll always be friends." "So do I said. When he drew me in again, I was sure he could feel my heart pounding in his chest. "Did you tell your sister to stay away today?" he asked. I stiffened. "Absolutely not. She thought this would be a boring affair," I said, and he laughed. "That's what I like about her, too. She says just what she thinks and feels. It's refreshing when you spend most of your time surrounded by dishonesty." "Refreshing?" I said, thinking of how my mother's revelations. Sometimes keeping the truth to yourself makes for more happiness. He shrugged. "Who knows who will be the happiest of us all? I wish we had a crystal ball. It wouldn't stop some of us from making the same mistakes," I remarked. He laughed again, but this time with a deeper, darker sound. When the piece ended, he escorted me back to the table. "I was getting jealous," Samuel said. "You two look too good out there." "Just let yourself go, Samuel. Relax more, and you'll look good too," Nelson advised him. He winked and thanked me and returned to his fiancée. We had come to the party thinking we would steal the glitter and glamour, riding the wave of social acceptance, but at that moment, I felt as if I was sinking. A rush of sadness washed through my very being. The sky was still soft blue with scattered clouds, but the chill in my bones told me the storm was just beyond the horizon. "I think I'd better go home, Samuel," I said. "I'm worried about Mother." "Oh, certainly," he said. "This is about over anyway." On the way home, Samuel bragged about how his friends and acquaintances congratulated him on the engagement. "Everyone thought we were the perfect match, Olivia. We're going to do great things together." He rambled on, but I didn't hear much. My mind was on Nelson and our intimate moments on the dance floor. What had he seen in my eyes? How had it affected him? Would we always be close friends? "Well?" Samuel asked. "What?" "I just asked you what you thought if I should come by tomorrow to take you to see the house and the property. I'll have the architect there if you'd like." "Oh, I'm sorry. I was in deep thought about Mother. You should call me at about 10 and I'll let you know how things are," I said. "Fine. I can't wait to see it, Olivia. Your father's seen it, you know. He thinks it's a spectacular piece of property." "You took him to see the house and the land already?" "Well, not exactly to see our property. I took him to see the historic house when I was contemplating on the purchase. I respect his business sense," Samuel quickly explained. I was still suspicious of all this, but before I could say anything else, we turned into my driveway and I saw the ambulance parked outside the house. "Oh no," I cried. I knew something was wrong. Samuel drove up quickly and parked. I jumped out of the car and hurried to the front door. I stopped in the entryway and looked up to see the paramedics carrying Mother on a stretcher down the stairs, with Daddy trailing behind and the nurse behind him. Mother didn't look conscious. "What happened?" I cried. "I think she's fallen into a coma," the nurse said. "We're going to put her in the hospital." "Dr. Covington will meet us there," Daddy said. "I can drive both of you," Samuel offered. No, I'm fine." "You can do me a favor, however," Daddy told him. "What?" "Belinda. I called and told her we'd be happy to pick her up. She's in the opposite direction. Do you know where Thomas Hughes' house is?" "I'll find it," Samuel said. "I'll go by and bring her over to the hospital." "I'm sorry," he said, watching them lead Mother into the ambulance. Daddy and I went directly to his car and Samuel drove off to get Belinda. They arrived before Dr. Covington had come to the lobby with Belinda. She only glanced fugitively at anything else around her before she believed she was looking at nurses and doctors, and she thought that she might get sick too. Samuel told me that you two were the hit of the party, Belinda began. She didn't even ask about Mother. I'm hardly thinking about the party, Belinda. We just brought Mother here in an ambulance. Don't you ever think of anything but fluff? I was just trying to say something nice, she wailed. I'm scared too. She sat sulking between Samuel and Daddy. I paced by the window until Dr. Covington came in to see us. I could tell from the look on his face, despite his stoicism, that things were not good. If she's indeed fallen into a coma, I'm afraid it might be for the best, he added. Her cancer has spread. Can't you just have it cut out like last time? Belinda cried. I'm afraid not, he repeated softly. It's gone too far for any of that now. Belinda began to sob. Samuel put his arm around her and she dropped her head into his shoulder and cried more freely. How long will this continue? I asked the doctor. Daddy was just staring at him. Days, maybe a week. It's hard to say at this point, Olivia, he replied. He turned to Daddy. I'm sorry, Winston. Daddy widened and brightened his eyes, as if they were two small flashlights he just turned on. Yes, thank you, he said, and then looked to me. We'll look in on her and then go home, I decided. Daddy turned to Dr. Covington, his eyes questioning. Yes, that would be fine, the doctor said. Belinda couldn't stop crying, and she remained in the lobby with Samuel. Daddy and I went into the room, and the nurse stepped away from the bed. I'll be right outside, she whispered, and she left us. Daddy folded his hands into fists as we looked at Mother. His body stiffened, the anger overtaking the sorrow in him for a few moments. She doesn't look like she's suffering, Daddy, I said. He nodded. No, she doesn't, he said, relaxing. In fact, she looks younger. If I knew her, she's already dreaming of being someplace pleasant, I said. Daddy smiled through his teary eyes. He took Mother's hand in his and stood there, and for the first time in my life I realized that despite how I thought he viewed her all these years, despite the value I had imagined on him, he really loved her as much as any man could love a woman. Mother was right about that. Would a man ever love me this much? Was Samuel capable of it? More important, did I really want his love to be that strong? Or was I like Mommy, closing my eyes and dreaming of a more pleasant place, a place where a man I really loved was with me? Mommy died 4 days later in the middle of the night. It begun to rain softly, only a few hours before we were called. The drops resembling the tick, tick, tick of a watch as they tapped against my window pane. They zigzagged like tears. Occasionally there was a burst of lightning in the distance. I heard the phone ring, and 5 minutes or so afterward I heard a gentle knock on my door. My heart was throbbing in my chest. I felt a hot flush through my body. Daddy was in his pajamas, barefoot, and his hair disheveled, and he was chalk white. It was the hospital, he said. Your mother's gone. He turned like some mindless messenger of death and went to Belinda's room and knocked on her door. It took her longer to answer. I stood in my own doorway and listened to him make the same report. Then I heard Belinda's wails. I have to go over there, Daddy said, turning back to me. There's papers to sign. I'll go with you, I said. No, just stay with your sister, he replied. And he went back to the bedroom and closed his door behind him. For a few moments I remained where I was, just listening to Belinda's sobs and gasps. I had yet to shed a tear of my own. I went to her room and looked in on her. She was sitting on the floor beside her bed, her head on her arm against the bed and her body jerking in small spasms. "Mommy," I heard her cry repeatedly. Finally, she caught her breath and turned to look at me. "Olivia," she said, her mouth twisting, "what will we do?" "Do? There's nothing we can do. I'll help Daddy with the funeral arrangements," I said. I didn't recognize the sound of my own voice. I felt as if I was speaking in a long, narrow tunnel. "What should I do?" "You must not do anything to cause him any more grief," I replied. "What do I do?" "I don't cause him any grief," she protested. "I don't have the strength or desire to go through the long list of your troubling things that you do, Belinda. You just do anything wrong for a few days. Can you please do that?" I concluded and returned to my own room. I heard her crying again. Then I heard Daddy out and start down the stairway. I went to my door to call him. "Are you sure you don't want me to come along, Daddy?" "What? Oh no, Olivia, I won't be that long. Get some rest. Tell Belinda to get some rest too." I heard the front door open and close, and then all was silent. Belinda was crying and began again, only louder. I went back to bed and stared into the darkness, thinking about my mother's last bright smile, a smile I would see no more. Less than 10 minutes later, Belinda came to me. She stood there at the foot of my bed with her arms folded across her bosom, her shoulders rising and falling in deep breaths. "She died before I had a chance to talk to her again," Belinda said. "What would you have said?" I asked. She was silent. She looked away and took another deep breath. "I don't know. There were things to say, weren't there? From you? Just 'I'm sorry,' I said." And she didn't want to hear it. "I would have said more than just 'I'm sorry,' Olivia. I would have told her how much I loved her, you know." In the glow of the hall light, her eyes glistened with tears while her face turned red with fury. "How can you just lay there and be mean to me at this moment?" "I'm not being mean," I said calmly. "Yes, you are. You've been meaner than ever to me just because of what?" I asked. My heart stopped and then started with a quickened beat. My ears were already ringing in anticipation. "Because of what I did with Nelson Childs," she said back to me. "I know you are." "What? Why's that?" "Nelson told me," she said. I stared at her. "That's the reason you've been meaner to me, and you know it," she said. How could Belinda have such insight? She couldn't. She's just taking wild stabs at me because she was in so much pain. "I disapprove for other reasons, Belinda, but I never told anyone." "You told him. That was enough," she said. "You've got Samuel now. You shouldn't hate me." "I don't hate you. Don't be ridiculous. I told you not to do anything to cause anybody more grief at the moment, didn't I? So don't. I'm not jealous of you, and I've never been jealous of you, Olivia. And I'm not jealous of you, so stop it." "Stop it," I shouted. She was silent. "Well, maybe I am jealous of you," she admitted. "Oh, and why would that be, Belinda? What do I have, or what have I done that you could possibly covet?" I asked, amused more than curious. "You spoke to Mommy last," she said. "You have that." She stared at me in the darkness for a moment, then she turned and went back to her room. Through the walls I heard her sob back to sleep. I lie there, finding myself feeling more sorry for her than I was for myself. I wondered if I always would. Mother had a very large funeral. There were so many people in attendance that the large number of them had to stand outside. The minister eulogized her as a faithful, loving wife, a woman who was truly personified the Christian spirit, full of love and forgiveness. At one point, Belinda cried so loudly I had to gaze at her with hard, cold eyes to get her to smother her sobs. Daddy looked stunned and straight ahead, shaking his hands and thanking the people mechanically after the service. It wasn't until we were at the cemetery and we stood before the open grave waiting to swallow Mother into the earth that I finally faced the fact that she was gone. I surprised myself with the intensity of my own grief. I would miss her so much. Ironically, she turned out to be the most honest person in my life. I could never be like her, but I recognized that I needed her, and I still needed her, and I never been more alone. Samuel stood beside me. He gestured to embrace me, but I stood away, straight and firm. Mother depended on Daddy, I thought. No man would ever claim to be my rock and foundation. Nelson and his family were at the church and at the cemetery. His fiancée was back in Boston. I heard some excuse for her absence, but didn't pay enough attention to remember it. The return to the house and other mourners comforted us. Our house was full of people, their voices low and melancholy at first, and then as the day wore on and grew louder, stronger until there was the actual sound of laughter and what had begun as gathering of mourners into a strange sort of party with people wearing their smiles and finding humor as a way to drive death itself out the door. For the most, it worked. It worked for Belinda, of course. Only an hour or so into the gathering, she was surrounded by her flock of bubblegum friends and a number of young men. She soaked up their attentions like a sponge. I watched her become Scarlett O'Hara, and then I fled from the scene and went to the rear of the house to stand alone in the shadows. I could see the rain clouds in the distance turning towards us. It wouldn't be long before they dropped their tears into the wind, funneling through the trees and over the knolls all the way to our home. What could be more fitting than a night of rain, I thought, and I hugged myself against the chilled air. Cold out there? I heard and turned to see Nelson standing behind me. He had a glass of bourbon in his hand and swirled it before he took another sip, his eyes on me. It's cold inside too, I replied. Yes, imagine it is for you, he said. I always liked your mother. She was always very up and happy. She made you feel good when she was in your company or you were in hers. My parents were fond of her. I nodded. When are you and Samuel planning on getting married? Samuel thought it'd be nice if we timed it around the completion of our house. What about you? A little less than a year. You might actually beat us to the altar if I know Samuel. He'll hook his eye teeth to hire additional workers and speed up the construction. You met your fiancée rather quickly, I said, or did you know her even when you came here? I asked pointedly, my eyes on the boathouse. Nelson laughed. You don't have any subtlety, do you, Olivia? You go right for the jugular. If you mean I go right for the truth, yes, I said. We knew each other. My decision to become engaged came shortly afterward, he replied. So you were just testing the waters to see if you were going to make the right decision, I said. He shrugged, something like that. We stared at each other for a moment. I wonder what it would have been like married to you, he said. Does Samuel fully understand how strong you are? How assured and competent a woman you are? The other women he's known have all been like Belinda? Nelson's lip curled into a weary smile. Yes, he said. I looked out to the sea. I haven't given him any other impression about myself than what I am, I said. Well then, either he's accepted that or he's being deluded, or he's deluding himself into believing he can change you, Nelson said, and I smiled without turning back to him. You don't think I can change? No, actually. I'm not sure I'd want you to change, he said, and held his eyes on me when I turned to him again. I wanted to say I thought he was coming back here to see me after he'd come to dinner with his family and not to have a dirty mention about him with Belinda in the boathouse. I wanted to say I thought he was better man than that, but I didn't. I simply bit my lower lip and swallowed back my regrets and disappointments like so much stomach acid. Your father's lucky to have a daughter like you, especially now, he continued. You're gonna hold your family together. You're a strong person. Too strong for you? I dared ask. He smiled. No. I'm too frivolous a person for you. We would probably end up killing each other, he joked. Yes, I said, cloaking my disappointment in a smile. He took another sip of his bourbon. Can I get you anything? No, I'm coming back in, I said. I just had to get a breath of fresh air. All those people. Yes, he said, nodding as if he understood, as if he could ever understand. Well, I'll be inside, he added, and reached out to touch my hand and then turned as we entered the house. I stood there trying to swallow. I felt as if the air around me had turned to ice. A few hundred yards to my right, Belinda's dead fetus lay planted like some seed of deformity, a sin pressed down into the darkness in the vain attempt to keep it forgotten. Belinda was capable of forgetting. That was her strength. She could wipe away her yesterdays like she wiped the chalk on the board at school and start again. I couldn't. Everything that happened and everything I did and thought was indelibly written on the surface of my heart. It was an organ covered with scratches and small tears already. The biggest tear came in the realization that Nelson Childs would never be mine. Desire was cruel. We should want only things we can have, I thought. Otherwise, longing becomes pain, and pain turns us into creatures of dissatisfaction. Sitting with arthritic curled fingers, scowling at the horizon, furious at the sun for rising and bringing us another day of disappointment. There you are, Samuel cried. Nelson told me you were out here. My poor Olivia, he said, sauntering over to embrace me. I smelled the odor of whiskey and onions on his breath, and my stomach churned. You shouldn't be alone at a time like this, Olivia. You can only be alone at a time like this, I replied. I'll make it up to you, Olivia. I'll work like a dog to make you happy again. I'll start tomorrow. I'll dig the first shovelful for the foundation. First thing, Let's go inside, Samuel, I said sharply. It's getting colder. What? Oh, yes, of course. He kept his arm around me clumsily as we approached the door. Then I stepped forward and his arm slipped away, just like Mother's hand, leaving me alone to face what was to come.